Indie Author Lab from the Alliance of Independent Authors is a brand new in-person event for indie authors during London Book Fair Week. Taking place in London on March 11, 2026, it's a full day of mentoring, workshops, and community connection. Created for indie authors by indie authors. Learn more and secure your tickets at selfpublishingadvice.org/indieauthorlab. Welcome to Self-Publishing with Ally from the Alliance of Independent Authors. This week we focus on branding, marketing, and promotion. Join Orna Ross as she interviews the brightest minds, experts, and insiders in the writing and publishing business. Get actionable insights to help you level up your author brand and reach more readers. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BookFunnel. Do you have reader magnets, ARCs, and direct digital sales? Want to join multi-author promotions? Thousands of authors trust BookFunnel for seamless delivery and real human support. Visit bookfunnel.com. And here's your host for Self-Publishing with Ally, Orna Ross.
Hello and welcome to Self-Publishing with Ally. I am Orna Ross, Director of Ally, the Alliance of Independent Authors, and here today to talk to you about marketing and promoting literary fiction as an indie author. So this is one for all the literary fiction people out there. It's also slightly relevant if you write poetry or other genre that are in and around this, literary memoir, creative non-fiction, essentially those kinds of genres where language and engagement with craft is very, very central. So I will be doing a separate one about poetry next time, but this time looking closely at literary fiction. And why talk about this particular genre? We don't generally give advice at Ally, about particular genre, because the Alliance of Independent Authors is a huge, broad church. And, focusing in on one genre is not really something that we do, but there is a particular problem or issue or set of challenges, I think, for literary authors. And I was at an event last night with a lot of indies, and the question came up in the room again: how do you market and promote literary fiction? And it comes up every single time it's raised, and nobody ever says, how do you promote romance, or how do you promote how-to non-fiction, or, it only comes up around these particular genre, literary fiction in particular, poetry, literary memoir, that kind of thing. So I thought I'd just kind of go in there, and also these are my own genre, and I work in these genre, and so yeah, I think the main thing that goes on here is based on flawed assumptions. In writing circles, there is an assumption that author marketing only works for genre fiction, or for genre, that it is much harder, shall we say, for literary fiction authors. And so much so, this is so much a sort of a set and ingrained thought that many give up or don't even try marketing and promotion. And so there's a kind of a double shutout, I think, for people in this genre. On the one hand, we feel shut out of the literary establishment, kind of the place where literary work is most visibly celebrated, the big prizes, the newspaper reviews, the festivals around the country, around the world, the literary festivals, the media coverage, and the cultural conversation that happens in a visible way in trad media tends to pick up very much on trad publishing, and it has a similar sort of vibe and way of going on. It's all about gatekeepers. Somebody else decides whether you are going to be there or not going to be there. Completely opposite to the indie world, where you choose yourself and you decide where you're going to be and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. That's the very nature of indie. But on the indie side, while on that side you can feel, oh, my work belongs there, but I'm not invited. I'm kind of locked out, and I'm not taken seriously because I'm self-published, or There's a cultural prestige barrier, status barrier, we might say. That can be really painful, and I definitely see a lot of literary authors with a deep sense of rejection and even grief, really, and definitely it presses down on the bruise of imposter syndrome that we all kind of feel. So it's not a small thing at all. And then on the other side, on the indie side, when people talk about marketing and promotion out there in the indie world, very often what they're talking about is rapid release, how to game the algorithm, ads and funnels. And there's a whole productivity culture, publish more books because more books means more income, more readers, etc. All of which is true, but the literary author can feel very locked out of that. That's not my work. That's not my pace. That's not how I think. It's not what I want to do. And it's not my audience. And so, yeah, the gap between these two, I suppose, is what this episode is trying to bridge. And I'd like to reframe the whole conversation. I want to say that literary fiction authors absolutely can market and promote effectively. And there are many examples of people who are doing that. But it does need a different mindset, different expectations, different tactics, because at the end of the day, it's not a special case. It's just another genre. But its readers have their own particular psychology and buying behaviour. And that is no different to any other indie author. It's, you need to work out how your readers think, what they're looking for, what your promise to them is, how they discover you, where they're going to buy your books, and how all of that comes about. So this isn't unique to the litfic author. I think what happens though is the trad conversation skews the whole feeling, and so we're not seeing behind that or beyond that. And the up until now, I do think this is changing in the indie community, but up until now, the large volume algorithm model was the one that we heard most about. That has shifted over the past few years. I think Ally has had its part in helping that shift along. And it's been a good thing for literary fiction authors as well as many, many other genres too. So, yeah, I will talk a little bit about my own shift in the past while as I have kind of, become clearer about how literary fiction authors market now in the mid 2020s, because that has changed too. So just before we do dig into the actual topic, I just want to say for those of you who may not have listened to a marketing podcast from Ally before or read our marketing books, we distinguish always between marketing as in setting up the author platform and fostering the long-term relationship with the reader, the discoverability piece, which is kind of slow and steady and cumulative and foundational. We distinguish between that question, really, that big question about your books. Who are my readers? What am I promising them? How do I build a relationship with them over time? And promotion. Book promotion is a time-limited campaign with a clear start and a clear, end and a very clear goal. So in this podcast episode, I will be drawing that distinction. Promotion answers a much smaller question, which is how do I create a moment of attention for this book right now? So I think that I'm saying this because it will feed into every aspect of everything else I'm going to say in this episode, but also because if you don't set up your marketing properly as a litfic author, then promotion is going to feel like you're just shouting into a void. And that, again, nothing unique with regard to litfic on this, except that sometimes it's harder for literary fiction authors to find the advice about setting up marketing properly. And of course, as it does for everybody, it begins with the reader. So there's one other, I suppose, theoretical kind of foundation to the thinking in this episode and in everything we do at Ally around book publishing, and that is that there are three publishing models: volume, engagement, and craft publishers. Authors can be one of those three, lead with one of those three. So we're always trying to sell more books, we're always trying to engage with readers, and we're always trying to produce the best possible book we can. That's a given. But each author must decide which of those three things is their lead. How are they going to lead? And this is, I suppose, the big reframe, if you like, for literary fiction and poetry authors who may be listening to classic indie author advice of high output and rapid release and wide funnels and large audiences and all of that. And literary and poetry authors are more likely to publish fewer books, to spend longer writing each of those books, and then to layer and go deeper, build thematic bodies of work, and also to care very much about design and physical editions. They want to, they're more likely to attract readers who will read standalones, and their need to reach readers directly is, I think, or to reach the right kind of readers is fed well by selling more directly, relying less on algorithms and more on the trust and that comes from excellence. So that's not to say that volume publishers or engagement publishers are not making excellent books. They absolutely are. It's not to say, so what I'm suggesting is that Litvic authors are almost always craft publishers. They care about the publishing craft as well as the writing craft, with a slower publishing pace, a smaller audience size, and deeper engagement. And like I said, that's not a weakness. That's the marketing world in which the Litvic author operates. And it's not different in the sense that every author cares about every good author, every good publisher cares about how the book is written and how the book is published. So craft is central for us all. But what is different for the craft publisher is they just taking that to a whole different level. And this isn't a weakness, this is a different publishing model, and leaning into that is the first thing that you need to do. In other words, leaning into it in your marketing as well as in your writing, as well as in your book production. Because very often I find with Litvic writers, particularly beginner authors, self-publishers, they can find that they are not inclined to do the marketing work. So, there is a sense, I think, when you've spent so long on a book and worked so hard on it and, first of all, in the writing, then in the book production, almost a sense like this book should sell itself. And as if the literary fiction genre wasn't crowded, but it is. And it is also a genre where excellence prevails. And it is also a genre that is most visible in trad publishing. It isn't any more common in trad publishing than it is in indie publishing, but it gets all the attention over there. So you've got to get your book all the attention over here. And that means your marketing focus needs to shift. If you've been thinking in classic indie style of kind of reach and scale and speed, you need to very much lean into the relationship, the depth, the longevity. So the other thing that I hear authors say a lot is that, well, it's a smaller audience and therefore it's a smaller opportunity and then there isn't enough people to buy my books. And I think that's another myth that we need to dismantle. Sure, the literary poetry audience is smaller than the romance audience, which is the biggest readership of all, always was. Of course, people who, want to read deep and meaningful poetry and fiction are in a smaller group than the whole bulk of readers who want to. And some of us, we are both of these things. We read Litvic sometimes and we read romance other times. We read crime. We read all sorts of things for our work. We read nonfiction. We keep up with the news. We're multifaceted as readers always. And as writers in a particular genre, we need to be aware of that. But specifically on the Litvic genre, yes, the audience is smaller, But that's really kind of irrelevant because it's huge. It's still huge globally. We're talking about millions of readers. And the thing is also that it's a very engaged readership. Litfic author readers, I should say, read more. They're very engaged. They form book clubs for discussion. They are very, and the other thing is they're very high value in comparison to other genres. So they're, in the mass fiction genre like romance and so on. People are looking because they read far more. And read far more quickly and are, going through books at a greater rate. They are looking for lower price books. But actually for Litfic readers will pay a lot more. They pay a lot more for an individual book. They'll pay for subscriptions. They'll pay for deluxe version, print versions, and so on. So the main thing I want you to begin with knowing is that the size of the audience is kind of irrelevant to you. You don't need millions of readers. You just need thousands of the right readers. And indeed, depending on your publishing model and how you set yourself up, you might only need hundreds of the right readers. So, the other thing about literary readers is they go to book events. They are subscribe to newsletters far more than most. They're very willing to support a crowdfunder. If they like an author, they'll follow you anywhere and follow you for years. Once they find someone they like, they tend to buy the backlist and they recommend passionately as I suppose readers in all genre do. But I think the book club bit, so many book clubs around the world tend to read literary fiction because those books make for very good discussion. And so the recommendations on word of mouth for literary can be more. It can be an actual advantage. And I think Litfic readers, the best way to describe them is that they behave more like patrons than casual consumers. And so it's a fantastic market once you understand it and once you set up your marketing to reach it. So the first thing, I think, as we set out to do that is to understand our own flaws with regard to it. So I think common tendencies that I have witnessed and that I have experienced are being uncomfortable with marketing language. This is far more common among Litfic authors than others. Being wary of sales tactics and consumerism generally, not being drawn towards that. Resistant to sort of content marketing, buy my book, that kind of marketing, and less drawn to tech and analytics than other authors might be. And I'm not sure about this, but I think Litfic authors might be even more private and introverted than others. I'm not sure about that. But what I am sure about is that artistic integrity is something that they take to a different level. And again, not insinuating that writers in other genres don't have an artistic integrity. They absolutely fundamentally do. But Litfic authors make it part of their identity and make it part of the identity of how they approach their work in a way that more pragmatic approaches that I see by people in other genre. And the other thing is this whole idea of selling out. I find that Litfic authors are much, much more sensitive to that and are also sometimes very uncomfortable with visibility. And their ideal thing would be the ivory tower, just write my books, and Sir Galahad agent comes along and sells it to the king publisher and they pay me to just keep doing this. And it's a fantasy and it creates a whole false belief in these circles that marketing is not for me. And got to reframe that if we want to reach readers. Now, if you just want to be in your ivory tower, and if you're happy to draw up the bridge and, not seek an agent and a publisher, then you can happily write Litfic, and that's beautiful. That's just great. But if you want to reach readers and you're waiting for the literary agent and the publishing golden deal, it's becoming less and less and less and less likely that you will get it if you don't self-publish first. Because this is it's still happening a bit. and always will. There will always be big publishers who will scoop up talent, I'm sure of that. But it is not it's just not what it was. And as time goes on, also everybody who is writing in the lit fiction genre and publishing traditionally, they have no income. It is essentially a hobby, maybe a paying hobby if you're lucky. And it's probably a hobby that's costing a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of angst. So for me, speaking personally, and for a lot of the authors that I've seen in the Alliance, it's understanding what indie can bring and understanding what it means to be indie as a literary fiction author is just so freeing, so liberating, because it can be just about you and the craft and then finding the people who appreciate that. I'm not saying that's an easy task. It's definitely not. It's something that evolves as well. It doesn't seem to stay in one place because I'm doing things very differently now than I did 5 years ago. And it's a long game. It's definitely not something that happens straight off. It happens reader by reader, subscriber by subscriber, but it does happen. So if you are writing books to standard and you're publishing them to standard, then it's fine. And if you, by publishing them to standard, I include in that marketing and promoting them to standard, because marketing and promotion are fundamentally parts of the publishing process. So if you're doing that well, then over time you will find your readers and you will begin to succeed. And the great thing about indie is you begin and you grow and you create for yourself sustainable routines that allow you to continue to grow. It's a very different thing to selling to a third-party publisher who has interest in you and your book certainly, but also has interest in many other authors and their books as well. So the thing is that I think, what's often not talked about here is that many literary fiction authors, the question that really kind of haunts them and that they carry around, and I think all authors, again, have this to some degree, but it weighs very heavily on the literary fiction author because of the quality thing, is that fear, is my writing good enough? So there's a fear stack always wherever we see a creative block. And if you're not marketing the books that you spend years writing, then you have a creative block around the marketing. And what fear underlies that is something that, a creative facilitator will always be trying to understand. And I think for lit-fic authors, there are loads of fears. We talked about, the fear of being commercial, too visible, looking self-promotional, all that kind of thing. But underneath it all, it is the writing good enough? Is my writing good enough? And the fear of that judgment, in a way, can really hold us back. And because you're looking at the world of the review establishment, the critic committees, all of that, you feel it more intensely, even and writers in other genre. So, I want to say, is my writing good enough is an absolute waste of creative energy. It's a great big fat hole that is leaching your creative energy because, as someone who I've reviewed books for national newspapers and international review outlets, I've taught literature to postgraduates. I read, multiple books a week and have done for the last 50 years. And I can tell you that good or great or bad, they're just empty adjectives when it comes to books. They just really don't tell you anything. They have no objective meaning whatsoever. There's the whole thing of an epic fantasy novelist, for example, is not likely to enjoy a little slim book of poetry and vice versa. But even if we do like the same books, what's great for you is not great for me. I am, as many of us are, a member of a book club, and we have great fun, all of us lit-fic readers, and love the genre, but very often we'll disagree passionately about the books. And the other thing that we don't really talk about, and it's connected to this, am I good enough stuff, is that there is a snobbery about literary fiction. And within the indie community, that can be felt by other authors and experienced in a certain way. And I think, a lot more conversation helps around this, because what also helps more than anything is realizing that it's just another genre. It is just another genre. And I think it was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I'm not sure, but I'm almost sure that it was, who said writing is nothing but carpentry, and both are very hard work, something to that effect. And if we begin to think about our writing and indeed our marketing in that way, I think it really, really helps us. And the solution out of all of this mixum gatherum of opinion and emotion is good values aligned marketing. So let's just, look at that a little bit more closely and stop mystifying literary in inverted commas and look at it just as another genre with its own reader expectations, with its own reader buying patterns, with its preferred formats, and with its preferred discovery pathways. And if we, reconfigure ourselves to think about it in that way, we just end up with a very simple marketing question, the same marketing question that all our other indie author friends have to struggle with, which is, how do readers of this genre discover and buy books? So how do they? Where are those literary readers to be found, and how do books come to them? Like every other genre, again, word of mouth. So there's that. And, that's useful and useless in equal measure, but it is still the number one driver of book buying, and in this genre as in others. And I've mentioned book clubs a couple of times, and I think they are great drivers for us. So that is one place to think about. Reader communities where they read serious fiction is another place to think about. And another, social media. A lot of literary fiction authors don't do social media well, don't like it, don't love it. But if you do, if you like a bit of engagement alongside your craft, then social media recommendations are a recognised way for litfic authors as well. If they get the branding and the author platform and all of that piece right, then social media can definitely sell books. Literary festivals, if you can get a place at a literary festival or other kinds of live events like that, where the readers who like your kind of work are found. So it isn't about emulating what the trad publishers do. It's about thinking, what do these kind of readers like? Where are they to be found? And what do I like? What do I like to do? What do I enjoy doing? What's kind of good for me? So also reviews and review magazines, that have a large audience. One thing I see a lot of litfic people doing is putting a lot of time and energy into magazines, and particularly online magazines that have little or no readership. You will be better off creating your own readership and working with another indie author who is doing, or indeed trad published author, who is reaching the kind of readers that you are reaching. Literary magazines are lovely. They're a beautiful part of the literary landscape. But if you're serious about selling books, they're all but useless. Unless of course, they have a huge readership. If it's the New York Review of Books or the London Review of Books, cancel that. But the kind of things where, you see so many social posts, yay, such and such a magazine is going to publish my short story or my chapter from my book or whatever. And when you go and look at that magazine, you see that it has a tiny readership. That isn't going to help to sell your book. If you're just happy to be published there, fine, but do weigh up the time cost. What is the time cost of doing that versus putting some good marketing energy behind your book? So same goes then for podcasts, essays and interviews, all of that. Do think about, does this outlet reach the people I want to reach? And does it reach them in sufficient number? We're not talking, if it's literary, it's never going to be huge. Fine, but wasting your energy on something that's going to deliver readers in the tens is probably not the best use of your time. So I think the main thing to say as well is when you're expressing yourself in any of these places, whether it's on a stage or on a social media post or anything in between, keeping the tone and the voice, yeah, voice is the word, keeping the voice of the author of the book like that is very important. So I have seen indie authors get an opportunity, be on a panel, be with authors, other writers who have possibly been, primed by publicists or possibly just naturally done it. But I've seen this more than once. And the indie author just doesn't do themselves justice because they talk about maybe different things. They talk about how they published the book, for example. They talk about being indie, or they talk about something that's not really feeding the need of the people who have turned up, whether it's to the social media post or for the event. And thinking about what the reader wants from you as a literary fiction author is really important, and holding that voice as you step out into the various spaces is really important. So physical spaces are, of course, much stronger for litfic authors than they tend to be for other authors. Indie bookstores are a good place, libraries, festivals, events, talks, workshops, all of those things are much more alive in our genre than in others. So, yeah, just a little bit about my own kind of shift. One of the things that I felt myself about my own writing and reaching readers and everything was that it was not being particularly well served by first of all, my publishing model, which was wide publishing model with an emphasis on being everywhere kind of thing. And similarly on social, I started off on Twitter, which would have been my favorite back in the day before, the unmentionable. And Facebook, I also spent some time there, and I spent some time on Instagram and various other places online, quite an active online presence, and enjoy the engagement. So I do consider myself to be a craft publisher, not an engagement publisher. And a while back began to feel strongly that this was not the best way for me to reach my readers, and I wanted to move into more of an ownership model, and which would be more sustainable. So decided to go direct and do the producing of some beautiful editions. I had done a lovely edition back in 2016 before it was a widely done thing, and enjoyed that experience so much, but thought of it very much as a one-off. Didn't ever think this could be my model, and looking back, possibly it should have been. I should have kept going with that, but there really wasn't the structures or the tech or the tools available to us then that we have now. So, yeah, I moved anyway. I came away from, I just use Publish Drive now to reach out into the world. I don't even go direct to Amazon. I'm looking at that at the moment, might change that one back, but maybe not, because I just don't want to think of the retailers as anything more than advertising, really, to take everybody back to what is now my Shopify store. I also much more recently closed my WooCommerce store, moved to Shopify, and I closed everything else that I was doing social media wise. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is gone, all of those, Patreon, various other places where I was, and brought everything to live on Substack. And I'm loving that. It gives me simplicity. It also gives me deadlines. I have targets and things that I reach on short posts, which eventually build into books and so on. And slowly, it's very early days. I'm just there a couple of months. Slowly, I can see how I can build a readership on Substack. Now, this isn't saying to you everyone should be on Substack. Not at all. But the reason I went there was it is still a writing first platform. The readers there are my kind of readers. And the relationships there are deep and very satisfying. And you can have your email lists there. You have your ownership. You own the list. You can leave any time. And it's combined with notes, which is their social media. And so you've got your email and your community combined. And I'm able to, do essays, I'm serializing my next novel. I'm putting out poems. I'm doing audio. I'm doing a salon where people live once a month. And we have a chat room where we can have conversation. So it's a place where literary readers already are gathering. And some of them are beginning to gather in my little space. And I'm quite certain that for some of you too, you can do that. So for me, instead of chasing readers everywhere, I'm now choosing to build in a place where they can kind of come to me. And I think that's a very powerful model for literary authors. And certainly it's working, as I said, personally. And as I said, this isn't about you all going on Substack. It's about you thinking about what is your equivalent. Now, what we're talking about here is thinking about presence, your voice. Literary readers love ideas. They like context. They like to understand what's going on. They love to know about what's going on behind the books. And you can have this direct reader relationship when you're selling direct. And you get the emails and the newsletter. This audience likes their emails if they're carefully crafted, as carefully crafted as your books is a key part of that. Emails that focus, and bring thoughts and reading lists they love, and anything to do with process and the personal connection and the community. I think that's the other thing that's really important. Literary community. So this isn't community that's, brought together by emotions or fashion or home or relationship issues or whatever. This is a community that comes together around reading. They love reading. And you're one of the authors that they love is your hope. So you can talk to them about reading much more than you can, I think, if you're in other genre. And literary culture generally is something that is of interest to them and certainly also to me. So I've enjoyed that. And the other thing is that they love special editions. They love hardbacks. They are socioeconomically well off, and so they have more money to spend on things. So if you can get special things that support your book writing and that they are interested in acquiring, then that's really good. And they love artisan publishing. They love the idea of the author and buying directly from the author. A lot of them are very socially motivated and they get the indie thing. They want to support the indie thing once they know about it. So all of those things, a crowdfunding model as a launch, pre-orders in advance, speaking in the voice that the writer of the books would have online as you go around, and then doing tactical promotions on each book, making a big event of each book that arrives because it's taken you a long time to write it. And while you're taking that long time to write it, building up to a big deal launch, whatever that might look like, and doing creative things that are different. This audience can definitely tolerate that. And I think the other thing is that they are much more interested in awards and things. So for the Litfic reader, the fact that you have an award, that you are turning up in a certain place can be significant. So there's an awful lot more that could be said, but I hope that in some way, provides some food for thought or provides something useful that you can work on. I just like to leave by saying this is a marathon. It's not something that happens overnight. Literary careers grow very slowly, but if you do it well, they grow steadily and cumulatively, and then something happens. A tipping point comes and things get a lot better. So think of each book not only as the book itself, but as something that is strengthening your marketing with authority and discoverability and reader trust, understanding what you're doing as a literary author, leaning into it, not being influenced by the other things that you hear pulling you right or left. So being somewhere and being meaningful and being consistent, I think those are the things that are really, really important. Important for everybody, but super important for literary authors. One strong content platform, I would say, one strong direct sales channel, I think works very well. But whichever way you go, valuing depth over spread. So yeah, I will be doing for those of you who are on Substack, I will be doing a live on this soon, just to see if we can connect literary authors on Substack. Those of you who are already there, love to see you if that sounds interesting to you. And just creating a space where literary fiction authors can share what's working and ask questions and kind of learn together and support each other and build confidence in how to market our literary work. So you don't have to figure it all out by yourself. If you don't know, you do get in touch about that. And yeah, I suppose I'd just leave you by saying again, the risk of repeating myself to driving you crazy, that like every other genre, when you understand the reader, marketing literary fiction becomes far, far easier. So that's it for this time. Next time we'll talk about poetry, which is much easier actually. Until then, happy writing and happy publishing. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Self-Publishing with Ally featuring Orna Ross. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BookFunnel. Do you have reader magnets, ARCs, and direct digital sales? Want to join multi-author promotions? Thousands of authors trust BookFunnel for seamless delivery and real human support. Visit bookfunnel.com. This program is produced by the Alliance of Independent Authors. Find author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.